Hello, my name is Gabe, and I figured this week we should do something a little different. So, welcome to the Anti-Franchise Awards. This is a companion piece to my large video a while back called the Franchise Awards for the franchise Danganronpa. And this is a series of one. I am making more of those, they just take forever to make. But in the meantime, I figured, why not go back, since I've talked about all the best Danganronpa has to offer, I go and talk about the worst and why. To really allow me a chance to be critical where I really couldn't have been in the previous video. The link to it is, of course, up here. I absolutely recommend you check it out because they are really cool. But this is going to be a little less production heavy, no weird puppet show or anything like that. Just me talking my honest, unscripted opinions as I remember for every category that was featured in that video. So, let's begin. Our first category was settings. And that was always an interesting thing to think about because what makes a setting good, right? But honestly, when it comes to the worst setting in Danganronpa, it's gotta be Toho City. I kind of played it down a bit for the video proper, but the city is so, as big as the city is, it's so homogenized. In every other Danganronpa game or property, every area seems to be different. Fundamentally so. There's an argument that the Future Foundation isn't, but even that's got some kind of personality to it in of itself. But Toho City is just kind of, minus a few areas, it's just kind of the same style of buildings and puzzles over and over and over and over again. It just kinda gets boring, if I'm being honest. Okay, the next category is execution. And well, picking the best one is fairly easy. If I use the qualifications I used to pick it, then the worst one has to be the execution of Alter Ego in Danganronpa 1. A simple truth is, where the execution of Peko ultimately fuel the character arc, and every other execution has resulted in there being one less character, Alter Ego ultimately survives Danganronpa 1 despite their execution. And therein lies the problem. As cool a moment it is, it's downplayed by the fact that it is ultimately meaningless, making it the worst execution in the game. Right, okay. Yeah, it's gonna be a Hangman's Gambit. You know that. And it's gonna be Hangman's Gambit too. Look, at the end of the day, the problem is, with Hangman's Gambit 2 is, well, you kind of end up, even if you know the answer, you kind of still have a good chance of failing because the thing is so overwhelming. You're not really figuring anything out or really testing any notable skills that relate to it. And the minigame is far too frustrating for what it is. Alright, so now we have to talk about where Monokuma is at his worst. Now, there is a qualification that you can give it in that technically Monokuma in Ultra Despair Girls has no personality. But I don't even think that's really the same type of Monokuma. I don't even think you can count that. But the anime Monokuma is barely present, and admittedly that's for a reason, but it does mean that I have to give the anti-award to that. Monokuma has no presence in Danganronpa 3, despite being there, so that takes it. So, the qualifications for the award are what talents are the best used, not necessarily what the best talents are. So that's an important distinction. And of course, obviously, since we're going in reverse, it applies there too. So, what is the worst talent, or in the series? What is the thing that is ultimately used the least. And I think that's tough. I got one. Toko Fukawa, Ultimate Writer. I bet a lot of people forgot she was the Ultimate Writer. This was the first tough one for this, because it is actually hard to think about, and I'm thinking about it. But if you look at every other talent, even when the talent isn't used, it's in some way referenced in their character, in a way that makes the talent significant. Outside of a few conversations and Ultra Despair Girls, Toko's status as a writer never really comes up. Now, to be fair, that's because that's not really the focus of her character. It's her other side that's really the main focus of her character. And also her crush on Byakuya. But that means that it is the worst talent, in that even if it belongs to a good character, it's never used. So yeah, she takes it. Alright, and now it's time for an easy one. The ultimate rival to Byakuya. Byakuya is the worst rival in the game, in the series. And for many, many reasons. And this is kind of why I wanted to make this video in the first place. So first, let's go over what it is Kokichi and Nagito do. And then we can show what Byakuya doesn't do. In Kokichi and Nagito's case, they both at some point in the game control it. And also seem to know everything from the outset. But they also represent the themes of the game. Kokichi in his master deception, and Nagito in his fanaticism. Byakuya is and does none of those things. How to explain this? The only time that Byakuya actually knows what's going on is when he is directly responsible for it, or at least happened to witness it. And even during that trial, as soon as the stuff he directly did was done, he suddenly had no clue. And in fact, is completely shocked by people's actions throughout the rest of his game. Kokichi and Nagito, on the other hand, seem to always know everything except for the game's major twists, and even then that's questionable. And ultimately, towards the end of the game, they both, in the second last chapter of their respective game, control the game, which is in of itself an incredible feat. But Byakuya never gets anywhere close to that. He never has that win. Not as a rival, anyways. He is utterly baffled by the actions of other human beings, despite his own insistence that people should understand people who aren't themselves. He fails to do that many times. But even more than that, he doesn't really represent any of the themes Danganronpa is really going for. He's not particularly any side of the hope versus despair debate. And one could argue, maybe he's an example of someone who didn't earn their way into the world and just got it handed to him, except he's not. It's made very clear from his backstory that he did earn it. He isn't a foil to Makoto. Sure, he's exceptional and definitely a lot less down-to-earth than Makoto is, but that can be said to the rest of the cast too. It's kind of the point. He doesn't go beyond that enough to be worthy of the rival title, which is why he's the worst rival in the series. Alright, the worst protagonist. I'm going to give this one to Kamaru, Makoto's sister. But I'm going to add the same caveat I did in the award show proper. She was really never meant to be a good standalone protagonist, so of course she wasn't. Her character was designed to bounce off of Toko. So if you don't, so naturally she's going to be hampered in this category. I don't blame her for it. Now, the worst villain. The worst villain is... I'm gonna go with the villain of the Danganronpa 3 anime. Tengen, maybe? I think it was called. The ultimate problem is he isn't very memorable. Like, nah, really, he isn't. It's not that he doesn't do anything memory-worthy, it's just that he himself isn't memorable. And ultimately, his plan goes wrong from the outset, so no matter how you measure it, he's not a good villain. Of course, the worst murder in the series. This is a interesting question, because by which metric does it make it the worst murder? But I think I found one that may check all the boxes. And as I'm sure a lot of you guessed, it's one of the double murders. And the murder I'm going to give it to is the very first double murder. The murder of Hifumi and Taka by Celestia Ludenberg. Well, every metric I can think about, this murder just sucks. From a storytelling perspective, it's obvious who the murderer is from the get-go. She's acting way out of character from the whole thing, when she's been very clearly indifferent to everybody since. Second, the whole thing is convoluted and contrived. Thirdly, it's just kind of wasted potential. And lastly, it's just not interesting. Yeah, no, that's really it. It's not interesting. And that, I think, is the worst of all. Anyways, I think that's where this is going to end. Those are my anti-awards. If you agreed, let me know. If you disagreed, also let me know. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, do subscribe and like the video. But more importantly than any of that, have a good night.